And please unmute.
That's true. So thank you, Ursula. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, I'm very honored to be keynote speaker in your conference, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's wonderful to be with you. It would be more wonderful to be with you in Krakow, but hopefully next time.
Next time, yes, of course.
So I will come to a crucial point and try to share my screen. I hope it works. So hopefully you can see my presentation. Okay.
Yes, we can see.
That's okay. Thank you so much. So my topic will be to better resilience of urban street trees in Central Europe. What trees will we plant in the future? And we heard a lot of some talks now, and of course the talks emphasize that we are in climate change. It's not that climate change will happen in the future. We are just in the climate change, and we see the first effects of climate change. And when you look to the deviation of the annual average temperature, even in Poland, you see that the hottest years we had in the last few years. And so nobody can say there is no climate change. When we come to street trees, we not only have to take into respect the climate change, but also, of course, the urban heat island, because you of course know urban situations are much more hotter than the situation outside that comes from the anthropogenic heat and from the storage heat. And that makes that we have in urban situations much more extreme conditions. Here you see a picture from Berlin, how it will get in the future, and you see the summer days and the tropical nights will increase until the end of a century. And that's of course one of the most striking reasons why we need street trees in the future, because they have shadow, and we can have a much better cooling effect than a lot of other measurements we have. So I will tell you only short about the ecosystem function, about the threats to trees in the city, about the climate change and globalization, when I will come to the biodiversity as a keystone for resilience. And then at the end, the most striking point is how to select climate adapted street trees for future situations. So ecosystem functions of street trees, you all know these lists of ecosystem function, and these are really striking arguments for us all in our green profession to come forward with our measurements, with our projects. It gets from beauty and visual effects to cultural dimensions to psychological dimension. We found it now in the Corona crisis that people want to get outside to green situation. It comes to all these ecological functions like cooling and shading. When it comes to cooling, we see that the cooling effect of green trees, hopefully you see my cursor. It's on the picture on the right hand side. You see the dark green is the city, the effect of city trees for the cooling in 2 meter height, and it makes a lot of that measurements effects because we have shadow and we have evaporation, and so that's why we need these trees in really hot summers like here. Picture from Paris when it was 30 degrees hot in that situation. We have, of course.
I'm sorry, Norbert.
Yeah.
Of your voice is a little bit worst. So maybe talk directly to the microphone.
Okay, I tried.
Oh, yes, it's okay.
Hopefully it's better.
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
Okay, we come to the threats to the trees. In the cities, you all know about this situation that we have different situations in the natural environment than we have in the urban environment, not only in the upper situation of the urban environment, but also in the soil. And here you can see the roots of the trees, which are very narrow compared to the roots we have here in a natural situation. That means that trees in urban situation don't get that old when we have the trees in natural situations. Here you see for some tree species how old they get. Here Coryllis colurna, it gets not 100 or 150 years old, but only 50 years old. And some only get like Populus 30 years old. And you have to ask whether it's really possible to grow that trees, because after 30, when you have to change every tree after 30 years, that's really not a long time. So that we have to take into contact that there is that the age of trees are much more less than we have outside. And so it's a common thing in Europe that we take into contact that we have to select urban trees in a certain way. That's not a new thing that we have to select trees in a certain thing. And of course, a lot of trees now have been selected. So in my opinion, the urban situation is much more better adapted to climate change or to extreme climate situation than, for example, historic parks and gardens, or for example, natural environments like natural forests. I'm sure you have these lists also in Poland. That's an example for a list of suitable street trees in Germany that you have. It's about 200 different trees, and they were recommended for use into streets. And that also exists, for example, for Mediterranean situations like here in Barcelona. That's also a list of street trees. And these lists are older than the idea of climate change. So I think in cities we are better at the moment, better adapted than in other situations. But what make global change to trees? I think we can talk a lot about the effects and the challenges for woody plants with increased climate change. These are only some of the effects, and I don't want to get deeper in these effects, but we have to know that street trees are not only a good thing for people during climate change. That means that adaptation to climate change don't only we have to plant trees. Trees were also affected by climate change and by all these effects that climate change make, like more spring drought and heat, more summer heat, higher winter precipitation, milder winters, longer vegetation periods, more dangerous late frosts, and more storms and severe weathers. Especially frost is an issue. We think it comes to climate change and there's no frost anymore, but there's a lot of, but the problem is that we have mild winters, and then after mild winters, when comes a severe frost, we have a lot of damages, and that happened often in the last few years. that we have still severe damages by frost, or here, for example, by the stem is damaged through heavy sun during the day, or through frost, or like here we have a storm event, and the street tree is of course over. Together with climate change, we also have the effects of globalization, and the effects of globalization are sometimes more obvious than the effect of climate change. If is often, of course, related to harmful organisms that migrate, and here you can see the number of tree pathogens and insects in the UK since 19, and you can see that there is, due to globalization, more and more of these pathogens come in a shorter time, and that's of course one of the really striking issues we have to face in the future, that we have not only climate change, but we also have these tree pathogens, and they will injure our trees heavily. One of the examples we all know in between is the ash dieback. Ash tree is a tree we love to grow also in streets here in Germany. And in between, I have to tell my students that they can't grow ash in the streets anymore, because we don't know whether it will, how the disease will develop in the future, and whether it is possible to have more of these ash trees. So we come to the question of resilience. What means resilience in the city, and what means it's especially to street trees? The problem of the term resilience is that it is used very often. Everyone wants to have a resilient urban situation, a resilient town, a resilient green space, but what does it really mean? How can you concretize the term resilience? And I try to concretize it for situation, especially for plants and trees. And resilience means redundancy and diversity. It means buffer and storage options. It means adaptation and development, and it means a complexity of system relationships. And I will show it for street trees what it can mean. So here you have a number of street trees in Berlin. It's over 430,000 street trees in Berlin, and you see how many genius we have. We have linden trees, we have acers, we have horse chestnuts or oaks, but the main genus in Berlin are linden trees. So that doesn't relate to the idea of diversity, because we have so many linden trees. So far, we have no real severe linden disease. But if there will come a linden disease, or if linden will not work anymore in the future, we will have a problem. So one striking point is to get to a more diverse selection of street trees in the future, so that we have not 30% of one tree. Same as in other countries. Here you see the street trees in Barcelona, and here we don't have so much linden trees, but we have sycamores, platanus. Platanus makes more than 30% of all the street trees there. And also Barcelona tries to get more diverse street trees in the future. That's one of the goals of their street tree strategies they have, to have more different kind of trees. What's interesting is that they have also trees we want to grow in the future, like pagoda trees, that's Stiphonolobium japonicum, or Sophora japonica, that's the old name. And when we look at the whole world, to China, to America, or to Europe, often the same climate trees were grown all over. And that's also an argument, not only to look to exotic species, but also to look to local species that form might be a better and more diverse development. So we come to the question of selecting of climate trees. How can we select? I would show you 6 different options for selecting of climate adapted woody plants. It is the one that comes from local proveniences of native plants. The second is plants from local growing. The third is climate adapted ecotypes. The fourth is to take selections and varieties. The sixth is to take alien species, but not from all over the world, but from neighboring areas. And the last is alien species from non-European territories. Local proveniences of plants. Often we have plants which live in an area for hundreds of years, and of course we think that these plants with live so long time in a certain area are adapted to that situation. We don't know whether they are still adapted when climate change is increasing, but so far they build a source for us for the situations, especially not only in streets, but also in other situations. Especially in old parks, we have these trees which were growing there for a lot of years. And that is really a genetic resource we can also use for the future, and not only for parks, might be also for street situations. Of course, when the trees themselves are adapted to climate and to street and to urban conditions. Oaks, here you can see a lot of oaks in Sanssouci. They can still be grown along the streets. Then we have the idea of local growing. That means that we don't buy plants somewhere in a nursery, in a tree nursery, but we grow it local in the situation we need it. That is a strategy that especially historic parks now go. We have that in Branitz, we have it in Bad Muskau, or we have it also in Sanssouci, that they reopen their local nurseries. And the idea behind is that the plants, the young plants, themselves get used to the factors, to the environmental factors. And there's also the idea that the genetics change during that early growing of the plants. There's an individual adaptation, and we call that epigenetics. So here is the epigenetics, means that that genetics also change during this early state of growing. That's an example when we were growing plants in the historic garden of the Neue Garten in Potsdam. The third things are horticultural selections and varieties. I mean, we have a lot of horticultural selections in between when you look at the lists of tree nurseries, but the most were selected to a certain form or to a certain color of branches. We so far have less selection on climate adaptation, but perhaps that also can be a part of historic gardens, that they show what kind of selections might be better adapted to the climate situations. Come to the fourth idea, how to grow adapted plants, species of neighboring areas. Here we have an idea of different plants. Here you see 3 different plants. They are not really street plants, but we use it in the forest, and you can see Fagus sylvatica, Larix decidia, and Quercus pubescens. And here you can see the situation of Germany, and you can see the situation of a plant. It's between precipitation and temperature. And that means that Quercus pubescens in the future, that's the small line, can better grow in the whole of Germany. In the opposite, Larix decidua comes out of Germany. That means it can't be grown in Germany anymore. And when we look to the regions of Europe with analog climate conditions to the future, of course, we need the plants from the southern and the more eastern parts of Europe. And I think we can also compare it to Poland. It's not a big difference between Poland and Germany here. And you can see where we, in the future, want to get the plants. This is a list of plants. Some of them we actually use, like Quercus ceres or Quercus frainetto, but some of them we rather use, and that will be a good source for street trees and also trees in parks and gardens for the future. Of course, you can also use alien future trees. We have, of course, a lot of alien future trees, and there are a lot to discover of these future trees. My colleague, Andreas Rohloff, he did a research about so-called Klimaarten matrix. That means the climate species matrix. And he shows that we have we have climates which are interesting for us for the future. There are a big diversity of plants is, a big diversity of wooden plants is. And he showed that a lot of these plants might be useful in our situation in the future. We have a lot of these, we still have a lot of these, but there are also a lot of very unknown plants which not were used in Europe in parks and especially streets so far. And the problem at the moment is that it can also not be bought because a lot of these trees you can't get in any tree nursery so far. So the task also for tree nurseries is to get more of these exotic trees, to grow more of these exotic trees, so that we can take it and we can we can use it in the future for the urban situations. When it comes to exotic trees, we have to talk about invasive species, of course. We have a lot of invasive species, and the invasive species work quite well in gardens. Sometimes they work too well. And I have to remember to the first talk to Monica. She says exotic species are a threat to historic gardens and a threat to the European nature. It's not totally my opinion, because I think it's also a good chance to use them, because they really grow. And so far, no native species died out in Europe because of invasive species. I think it's about managing them. It's about caring for them, of course, but they can also build a good source because they obviously work very well, and that it comes to ecological things we need in the future. They can really serve us for the climate change situations. So I want to cite one thing I love very much, one citation I love very much. It says, if native-only approaches become incorporated in regional, national, and international policy documents or legislation, there's a risk that urban ecosystem resilience will be compromised, particularly for urban areas with extreme environmental conditions. So exotic plants are not only a threat for biodiversity, it also opens new possibilities, and sometimes we need it for future needs. So hopefully I could show you that we have to think about more diversity in our streets, and we have several options. There's not only one option to take exotic trees or to take native trees, but we have several options, and we have to try out what's best for a certain situation. And I think it's about the individual planning of streets, of urban situations, of parks, and of historic gardens, and how to select it in the best way we can. So thank you very much for the audience. Hopefully I could give you some ideas about the selection of trees in the future. And thank you very much for listening to me.